Hey folks, I'm not sure exactly what's happening. I was just trying to get all of my crap together. Can't even really tell if my microphone is working or anything. When YouTube suddenly said, "Oh, live stream is not available right now." So bear with me as I keep walking through this and see whether it's even working or not. I do think that I have mic levels, so that's good anyway. I have a different chat window. That is actually the one that is supposed to be working. One hopes it will. Live chat again. Apologies for anybody who just got flung off of the chat into a different chat, but I mean, it literally told me, like, "Oh, hi, this is not available. Finish," and there was nothing I could do. So I'll be catching up with people as you find your way in, or don't find your way to the new chat at all, or whatever goes on. Far be it from me to be able to make sense of what YouTube does to us. Anyway, that's OBS is there, and apparently there's one person here, maybe, or possibly not. I saw Bo in the other chat. I hope he finds his way back over to where the real one's supposed to be, and I'll clean up all this mess later. I didn't even get a chance to drink any coffee. I was up really early and up really late a lot and getting some work done. And I've got a few very new things. Hi, Ahmed. I have a few very new things, even from this morning, that you wouldn't have heard anywhere. So I can tell you about them here. Yeah, go get Bo. He's in the other chat. Technically, there's no way that you can do that, sadly. But anywho, I am here to do my live chat thing if I'm allowed to do it. And if YouTube just keeps flinging me off of the chat, also, let me do the thing that I'm supposed to do, which is announce this. And we'll see whether that works or not. Let me see if I can't do that. And I will also tweet it. And here we are. I hope they don't throw me off of the chat again. That was very inconvenient. I didn't like that part much at all. That I could get started up and be more or less on time, to just barely be ready to start on time, only to have the whole thing fall apart and go boom. That's no good. So yeah, I mentioned there being a new thing. Hey, David. Oh, I'm sorry you're feeling tired and grumpy. I'm feeling tired and grumpy too, but I'll feel slightly less tired when the coffee cools down enough that I can drink some of it. And as soon as starting us right off with a question, so I will see whether I can't answer that. Hip hop and house beats. Well, I have this little thing called tape that's going to be edited before very long. I'm sort of openly asking people, and I can get a sense here in the chat as to whether it's a good idea. I'm kind of asking whether it's worth reissuing that under the same name and putting in a control where it goes from the tape head bump that it currently is to silence and defaults to half as much as there currently is. That might be just what the tape plugin needs, because people do seem to find it distracting, the amount of head bump that it has on it. But currently, it does not have that bass head bump. Instead, it defaults to much too loud. So you could try that. That is a tape emulation plugin that has a built-in tape head resonance control in it. And it's currently in a state of probably too much. So you could call that really getting bass thumping. It'll certainly make anything heavy. Let's not worry about that day. They're talking about a couple of weeks where I had people being frisky on a live stream. Oh, now YouTube is complaining that the bitrate 8,922.86 kbps. Picky, are we? They're paying too close attention to exactly how many bits are coming in, fractional bits. And what I'm sending is supposed to be along the lines of a little under 5. So I don't know what their problem is. Stefan is also jumping on, asking a question. We might end up having a lot of that. I'll see whether I spend the entire stream answering a rapid-fire array of questions, because that might keep me sort of on subject more than most things. One button wonder VST that makes speech recordings like podcasts sound great. You might try literally podcast, the VST podcast. It won't necessarily do that, but I guess that would be an opening thing to try. Sure, give that a shot. So I need to take a moment to explain the new thing. I'm not sure how many of you are aware of the fact that I have a SoundCloud, because I do music on that. And no good would come of that, obviously. But something went up on the SoundCloud this morning that you might find kind of interesting. Namely, I mentioned when I did the starter kit that I had a mix. Actually, it's all fine. I had a mix of a sort of rock song done with an analog board, and then I spent time with the starter kit thing replicating that mix in the box. And it is based on a Purist console setup, and is using a limited number of other plugins to get basically the same vibe. Not exactly, but I made a good hard try at getting the vibe in the box that was otherwise achieved kind of more quickly and easily, but that's because I was trying to clone something, honestly, in a ritzy frou-frou analog outboard mixing setup. So the SoundCloud has something new. It's a playlist, and that playlist is a series of takes that, if you know how SoundCloud works, you can switch among them fairly easily, of that same mix with every possible console version represented. I just swapped out versions of console. You got console 4, you got console 5, you got console 5 dark, you've got C5 raw, which is the early console where the algorithm doesn't handle sawtooth waves, and I've got that represented as well in 2 different levels, because there's one with some DC offset correction put in at point 2, and then there's one at point 1 where it doesn't successfully correct. So you get to analyze that recording and see what it's doing, if it's doing something wrong. Like that one, I guarantee it's doing something wrong. You can look at it in the download. And there's Atmosphere, there's PD console, and not only that, but not only is every version of console represented that I have available in that stuff, but I also have some ringers, meaning not just the analog mix, which is thrown in there, but also I did some experimenting with weird stuff like what do you get when you're running console 5, but instead of using the console channel encode, you throw spiral in there. Just the first spiral. Those plugins that I did that were experiments that don't even have controls to them, Spiral, Mojo, Dino. I tried it out. I tried out what these various distortions were, these audio experiments for that kind of stuff, with a particular emphasis. Like I wasn't really interested in multi-band distortion as a replacement. I wasn't that interested in channel 7 as a replacement. But the ones that were literally different, like Spiral, like Dino, like Mojo, I thought it was worth trying it and seeing what I would get if I swapped out Purist Console channel for one of these ringers, one of these ones that doesn't actually correctly do the console thing and give you clean, unaltered audio if you just switch encode and decode, which is what they're normally supposed to do. The results were kind of interesting. Predictably, using Mojo instead of Purist Console channel gave a louder output in a sort of funny character. It's all changing the characteristic of the mix bus summing. Dino got kind of lean and sort of expanded and edgy in a weird way. And using Spiral was actually kind of interesting. There was, it takes away a certain amount of fatness and girth to the mix, but brings curious clarity. So to my ears, these were worthwhile experiments, and I have all the original 24-bit 96K things that they were all done on in a folder. So in future, when I'm going to be putting together more kits of things, what I'll do is refer to that and figure out which one would best go with a given kit for something I'm trying to make happen, and be able to use that, which includes maybe using one of the ringers, maybe using Spiral or something as the way to get that. Say if I'm listening to, say, the Beatles' Revolver and going how do I get that old red sound in a kit? Well, I can do stuff like throw focus in there or default it to something subtle where I'm raising the energy, build stuff into it that way. But I could also look into picking out the console version specifically for the purpose of making it. It's like I can choose the version of console on the basis of what kind of summing behavior I want to start off with, and that should help a great deal. And it's not just me who gets to fool with that, because as of this morning, as of just a little while ago, you can go onto my SoundCloud, if you know where my SoundCloud is. It's soundcloud.com/Airwindows. And there's a playlist right up front where you can go there and then listen to all those different variations on console if you're curious about that. That is something that I thought would be a nice little resource, especially because people always have lots of questions as far as the console is concerned. So we'll see how that works. Let me have another sip of coffee while I try to get up to speed with all this. As usual, people showed up in large profusion and then ran away because I don't talk very sensibly. I don't know what to tell you, man. That is like, you struggle to listen to this head like one time a week. I'm stuck in this head literally all week long. So I would say you got it easy. So let me scan around and continue to follow this question. Ahmed did ask, and remember that, we got caliber, we got distortion, we got focus. How far are we from getting an Airwindows amp? Depends. I'm not satisfied with the ones that I've got, but I do have some reissues to put out. So I'm going to need to put some of those out maybe before I actually get a real one worked out. I find that very challenging, this making amps in the box thing. It doesn't really work for me. So, nor do transistor amps for that matter. Yeah, and I'm not very happy about the I got happier about them when somebody was like, "Oh, hey, yeah, I put that on drums and hip hop beats," and I was like, "That's legit." Okay, now you're making more sense to me, because I was not satisfied with the sounds that those things were making, as far as making a good guitar sound. But just as a general purpose tool, that's something I can understand a little better. Kim is asking, could you explain the analog feeling and where it comes from? Also, often you'll notice that my chat is often able to answer questions too. So when they chime in, sometimes they're actually saying what I would have said beforehand, because they're not the only person with all wisdom and stuff. It all just sort of grows out of, I wouldn't necessarily say all out of the community, but the thing is, if I say something like half a year ago and somebody was like, "Oh yeah, that sounds really cool," and started experimenting with it, they're confirming it on their own behalf, and then they might answer the questions, so Dusan was in fact looking for the old amps plugin for that purpose. Yeah, see, that makes good sense to me. So where the analog feeling comes from, there's a number of things. And this is partly the demos that I've just put up on the SoundCloud with the console playlist goes some way towards that, because I got a bunch of different variations on my take on that stuff. But then I've also got the analog mix stuck in at the end. And if you listen to that, there's a guy that sasses me on YouTube a lot, and he is this Drummond engineer of some kind, if I'm remembering correctly, because I looked up on him at one point. I was like, "Who are you?" He keeps sassing me like this, and he hates analog, and pretty much none of the other people hate analog, but he's like, "Oh, it is garbage. That stuff is garbage. It's terrible. And the analog mix sounds much worse than the digital ones. And all of this stuff sounds much worse than if you just left everything off of the mix bus and just did a digital mix and stuff." And, I don't agree with a lot of what he's saying, but it's real interesting when you sort of stretch your mind a little bit and try to see things from his perspective. You go back and listen to, because one of the things, thanks to the Patreon working so well over the last couple of years, I'm able to accumulate stuff that I can then study. So when I was doing this starter kit, I'm modeling the starter kit as close as I can on a fancy pants Heritage audio mixer, which is sort of like one of those, dangerous two bus or whatever, and you're running everything out of the channels and summing it in analog. But it's more than that, because it also has pans and aux sends and things. It just doesn't have faders. It's a knob-based mixer. But it has a whole panoply of really useful stuff, while still being essentially a line mixer. It does not have EQs. And I was thinking, first of all, I can throw those in the box pretty effectively, but I can also record and track and arrange stuff so that I don't have to turn to EQ to fix things for myself. And that's what I've been doing. Now here's the thing. When you listen to that analog mix off of the SoundCloud, he's got a point. The guy's got a point. It is a very classy analog mixer. I mean, it's really pretty, like, you'd have to get into the rail mixers and be spending tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars on them to go that much beyond what it's doing, because it is that simple and focused down on very little. But even so, you find that there's this sort of softness. There's like the blur or the smear going on. Some people are just all about that. They're like, this is the best thing ever. I want more of that. Everything must be smeared. Everything must be blurred because it must sound like analog. And this guy's like, no, wait, that's garbage. That stuff sounds terrible. Why do you like it? Shouldn't you prefer just in the box? And if you try to pay attention to, yeah, I thought Bo was here, but he showed up in another stream and maybe still waiting for it to reboot because YouTube was messing with me and like killed my stream and said, oh, by the way, streaming is not available, and then immediately let me start another one. When this guy was talking about how bad the analog mix was, even though it's a reputable mixer and it's a very serviceable set of converters and it's being captured with a really good. Yeah, you got to go into the other Q&A stream and get the other people if you can find them, because it will never start. YouTube was messing with me. YouTube let me begin a stream and then said, by the way, we can't do live streaming now. Sorry, okay? So if you can get people in that one, or I wonder whether maybe I can go and get people out of that one. Let me fool with this a little bit. I've been going on about stuff, but maybe I can just manipulate that or kill the other stream. Because that's YouTube doing that to me. I wasn't able to do anything better. Oh, General Access to Classic Studios going away. That's fine. I knew that you were doing that already. No. That's not helpful. Trying to find... This is me loading up the dashboards and such and trying to figure out how I can make that other one die. Let's see. I got this open in a separate window. There's the live. If I can kill the other one, then if I kill this one, that'll be bad. But this one is the one that is live. I tell it I understand deleting is permanent. And I make it die, and hopefully it hasn't killed the one that I'm currently doing. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so if all goes well, I killed the one that wasn't real. Again, anybody who is trying to watch this and wondering what happened, I started a stream and was like 3 seconds away from going live exactly at 11, and it was like, oh, hi, streaming is not available. Thanks, finish. So there was nothing I could do. That was just broken, and it was YouTube being broken. Yeah, go ahead and share, David. Now, what the hell was I talking about? Here, let me sip more coffee and see if I can remember what I was talking about. It was the guy who hates analog. See, the thing is, if you listen to that, analog mix, even though it gels really well. It does a lot of the things that one wants out of analog mixes. Like, you know, it gels, it has like textures that are good, it's not fragmented, but it also has some of what the guy talks about as far as it's like overly smeared. It's the clarity is somewhat lacking. There are things about it that are not that perfect, and it was interesting to me. Like, I re-listened to what was going on as far as my actual stream. I'm having a lot of time keeping track today. You just bear with me. I'm doing a bunch of stuff. Yeah, hi, Bo. Yeah, you showed up in the previous stream and the stream froze and YouTube broke it. I'm glad to see you finally made it. I had to go and kill the other stream. You were being very loyal and sticking with it, not realizing that there was a whole other stream and I had social media posted it. By the way, Bo, since you missed it, you know my SoundCloud? There is now a mix of that rock song that I did with the starter kit where I rebounced it down with every variation of console. So, and also for anybody who's listening to that, not only did I bounce it down and put it on SoundCloud so that you can stream it off of SoundCloud, you can also download every single one of those, or at least I sincerely hope you do. Otherwise, I need to go and fix that, which maybe I won't do during this stream, but I'll have to do it immediately after. I actually don't remember whether it even gave me that option, so I might just need to go back in and set every single one of those videos independently to allow downloads. Once I do, you'll be able to download all of those tracks that they end up being about 100 megs or so as a FLAC. Once I do that, you'll be able to download the 2496 and compare those on your computer if you want, rather than just only on the SoundCloud. So the intention for that is having it be a useful little tool for how to deal with the variations between console without necessarily just setting it all up yourself, which is something you could also do. You can do that. So, David, you'd like a morph, basically a morph knob, two separate distortions in the one box with a dedicated knob, which would act like dry wet, except for that rather than between dry wet, it'd be between wet A and wet B. I would love to see you learn to code so that you could start doing some of these things. Like if you started doing that and got it going, I can't be very much help as far as setting it up, but I would love to see you trying to do some of those things. Because that is not a thing that I can do, but it's a distinct idea and there's no logical reason it couldn't be done. Like you could get like Blue Cat Patchwork would probably do you for that. You could do that in Patchwork pretty easily. Or if not easily, then at least it could be done. Let me scroll up. See whether I can't keep an eye out on things. Yep, we got into, oh, hello. Michael had one. Yep. Also, I started talking about Kim's question, the analog feeling, but I didn't get really very far into it. There's a number of things where analog circuitry doesn't do perfect mathematical summing of things. Neither does air when you get right down to it. Like, part of the analog feeling is the fact that air is not perfectly linear and digital math is perfectly linear. So all of the unaltered digital math basically gives you Sound mixing is if all the sounds were mixing on the surface of your eardrum, not in the real world, or in air, or in a electronic thing. I have not yet managed to exactly replicate air, but the whole console system does a fair try at replicating the sound of bus impedance being manipulated, having channels distort a little bit easier if they're going into a bus impedance that is a low impedance and versus a high impedance. These are changes that they're not necessarily superlinear. It's not like just a oh Christ, YouTube is saying the bitrate 4,924 is higher than the recommended bitrate. Well, geez, guys, your recommended bitrate is getting lower and lower all the time. So yeah, the analog feeling, I mean, this is a big enough question that people aren't usually very good at solving it. Like plugin makers usually just throw on some distortion and EQ and call it a day. That's not the answer. But we all do various things to try to get that. Some people do very complicated emulations of the parts in a circuit, or just very complicated EQs and distortions and things. And you can do various different kinds of things, but it's mostly like perfect math is not musical. Perfect math is not what sound sounds like in air, much less what sound sounds like in circuitry. And you start incorporating more of those nonlinearities. The question is which ones? And it's like the guy that hates analog on my YouTube channel, where he doesn't like any of those nonlinearities. And he likes a sound that a lot of people find very objectionable, presumably because his ear can pick out every little tiny detail without particularly working at it. But we like working at hearing into a mix. We like having stuff be maybe a little bit more murky, a little bit more complicated. And our ears are usually attuned to hearing into stuff like that. So it's neat hearing the guy that hates analog. Occasionally he likes stuff that I do, and very often he just hates what I do and seems to hate me. And it's like, okay, you heard from that country again. But it's interesting to listen to things the way that he seems to listen to them and be like, yes, in fact, this particular costly analog mix sounds kind of smeared. It sounds kind of, there you can hear lots of the nonlinearities that are just right there. And there's other things like aliasing or whatever that's not there at all. It's a combination of those things. But also warmth can also be brought by even harmonics like second harmonic, and that is distorting asymmetrically. That is having stuff happening where the waveform doesn't keep perfectly symmetrical. Instead, you can get a warmth effect from second harmonic. You can get a warmth effect from sort of smoothly distorting stuff in only one direction rather than having it match perfectly. Happy Guy does have a quick question. What do you think about guitar pedals versus plugins? I like using guitar pedals. I don't like using plugins on guitars. That said, I have made some, like the guitar conditioner, which has a basic concept that's a little bit like a tube screamer going on, and that can be useful. Michael Curtis asks, is there a way to take advantage of console effects in a mastering situation? Or is this basically bus colors? Oh no, bus colors is not mastering. All the coloring stuff, up to and including tape emulation, those don't really count as mastering. Mastering is about extreme transparency and clarity and being able to manipulate stuff in really specific ways. So like biquad 1/2, those are things that you could consider as mastering. If I made multiple biquads within a single thing so that they could all run as a long double resolution and have minimal transitions between plugins, that would also be mastering like. But that said, there are ways of taking advantage of console effects. Basically, if you're running something, and also mastering, you're probably not doing reverbs or anything like that. If you're doing like the DAW EQ, if you're doing a EQ that's like your Logic channel EQ or whatever, some of the way that works, or indeed my biquads, some of them already use the console concepts in them. What you can do is to use like Purist Console and go Purist Console channel, Logic channel EQ, Purist Console bus. And if you do that, you're going through the EQ, you're going through a console system that needs to mix multiple things, otherwise it's going to come out at exactly the same as it came in. But you're doing equalizing rather than mixing multiple things. The thing to remember about EQs, particularly something like the Logic channel EQ, stuff like that, where they let you have high resonance, high Q, is it acts like you have a little sort of ringing filter in there. You wind up with a resonance that acts like it's made out of delays, and in using the EQ, as you crank up the steepness of those curves, you're needing to incorporate the original sound with instances of it that are being brought in. If you use console on that, you can expand the insides of the EQ. And I've tried this a number of times, and you can in fact use bus colors for that. I think bus colors is designed to go with console 4, if I remember correctly. And it's certainly calibrated to do that, not so much any other one. And if you use like bus colors, what's the one that was based off of the Manley Massive Passive? It wasn't Lush, because Lush was based off of the Neve model, or Punch. Oh, maybe Tube or something. I think maybe there is that. So you can encode with that, decode with console 4 bus, put the Logic EQ in there, and get a more lush, complicated sounding EQ over and above the tone colorations that are being applied by bus colors. Or you can just use like Purist Console, channel, and bus on either side of the Logic channel EQ and expand outwards anything that you're doing with resonances in the EQ. And what will happen is similar to what you get when you start working with analog gear, like analog EQs and stuff, is you find you don't need to apply as much of it to clearly hear what's being done. And the measurements aren't necessarily going to be the same as it says on the tin. Like you can do exactly 6 dB boost of this in the channel EQ. You put it inside console, you wind up getting more than 6 dB out of it. But it will sound like if you were throwing that on using a analog EQ. And that is how you would take advantage of the console series effects in a mastering situation. It's not really about adding blurs and colors so much as it is about expanding outwards a type of sound. This is me catching up with the Q&A stream and killing it. I apologize for that. YouTube did that to me. It was indeed a double stream. I'm open to questions if everybody is okay too. That seems relevant. I gotta scroll up again to see what people are saying. Not there. Tokyo Dawn Records Labs plugins. I have no idea. Made a phase rotator and phase nudge. Any plans to make a phase shifter? Yes, but it isn't coming along very well. I got to figure out how to do that better. What I fooled with didn't work out immediately, but it could happen in future. Metallica tracks and Lars Ulrich being bad and Ringo being bad, and okay, fair enough, guys. I play drums myself. I emulate like Nick Mason more than any of those guys. I certainly wouldn't want to be a metal drummer, but you gotta understand when you have a drummer that is part of a band that lots of people can be like, oh my God, this is the best thing ever. There's something positive that they're doing. It's just not maybe what you think it is. And I owe a lot to Nick Mason as far as my own drumming style is. But it's often not very linear. And I just try to groove it or vibe it because I'm not going to become like Chad Wackerman. That will never happen. But I can play simple things and I can get a sound and I can have that on tap for if I want to do songs or record stuff. Blue Cat's Patchwork inverting any plugins utility. I don't know. John Smith mentioned Psytrance bass. That is actually very interesting to me. I'm looking to fool with that maybe this upcoming week when I get back into the techno stuff after having not done it last week. I did no techno jam, I did no ambient jam last week because I was working too hard on the rock track and all of that starter kit stuff, which felt more important at the time. But Psytrance bass is basically 2-3-4. You go kick 2-3-4, kick 2-3-4, ideally really fast. And you do not want that to be sloppy. And often it's going to be some kind of synthesis, very, very sharp and punchy and aggressive. I'm actually kind of interested to fool with that in such a way that I try out sine waves and use that for a Psytrance bass with the same kind of impact and dynamic behavior. I'll see whether I can fix that up maybe for Tuesday. Hard to say. Might be fun. I'd like to try that. Ahmed should pick up drumming, maybe. Can I explain how auto release and compressors work? What sets the release parameter automatically? That's probably going to be how loud everything is. And you can do that digitally as well as in analog. Basically, how auto release and compressors works is if you have a bunch of sound happening continuously, that can be like behavior X. If the compressor hears nothing much happening, that can be behavior Y. So the question you ask is, if I can tell the difference between lots of stuff happening constantly and not much happening at all, silence or a bunch of loud sound, which do I choose? Do I choose to have the release be very fast while there's lots of sound and slow down when things are fairly quiet? Or do I choose to have the release slow down when there's lots of loud sound and get very fast when things get much more quiet? Those will have opposite effects, but they're both things that you can do with auto release. What sets the release parameter is basically an envelope follower. It's like one of those guitar pedals where you're listening and going, wop, 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 and it's making a filter go up if the sound is loud or not. It's reacting to your touch. That's how auto release works, is it's reacting to the touch of what the mix is doing. And if you hit it hard with something loud, it will act in a different way versus if things are sparse and there's not much loud going on. It's an envelope follower. That said, there are also kinds of compressors that have that behavior going on too, namely opto. and this is worth looking into, like if you do a digital version of an opto compressor, you got to model the curious way that photocells react to light. And there's a number of things that you can do, like photocells react to light. If you hit them really hard, they don't respond, they don't go back so quickly. That becomes a envelope follower where if you're crushing it with a lot of high volume, then it's going to slow the release. Whereas if you're only hitting it with brief stuff, that's going to be a faster release. So what that does is it hits a sort of happy medium where if stuff is hitting it with quick dynamic things, it'll bounce back fast. But then if you have a lot of steady, heavy noise going in, it's going to not respond as quickly, and that'll give you more of an automatic gain control sound. And the density of the sound will hit a sort of common factor where if stuff is real sparse and choppy, it'll be compressing that more aggressively. I think this is the way that I remember it. I've fooled around with this before, but I could have it backwards for all we know. Sometimes I get stuff wrong, but this is the way that opto reacts differently. You have auto release in opto by virtue of just how the circuit parts work. And if you're smothering it with heavy level and stuff, it sort of fatigues and doesn't bounce back as quickly. And that has the effect of slowing the release and making it be more compressed and less dense, which if you're hitting it with lots of heavy stuff, that's just making it be more compressed and quieter. So it's a sort of consolidating factor. And you could do literally the opposite. If you had a opposite opto, opposite O, where it bounced back faster if you smother it, that's basically like a very mu compressor. I've already got that one. And pressure acts like that. So if you turn the muiness up, what you get is like smash it more and it starts bouncing back faster. I'm pretty sure that's how that works. These are all things that can be exaggerated. These are all things that you can do. They're very similar to auto release in compressors. The whole thing about it is like, which direction should the release go? It could do any number of things. And it's not a given as to whether it's going to be one thing or the other. And then let me see. Hangstream, yep, doing that. I have somebody who actually joined in recent last week and really clicked pretty well and enjoyed playing the Minecrafts and stuff. So we brought that person on and had some fun time with it. That is Wednesday evening, and it's kind of an unwinding, and it's me catching up with folk. And yeah, we do talk about other stuff. But generally anybody who really clicks with that is somebody who is going to actually enjoy Minecraft as a game, which is not unthinkable. I mean, it's been a pretty popular game. It's like if you can play with Legos and find that enjoyable, then you can play with Minecraft and find that enjoyable. Behringer is going to make a DAW. Of course they are. They're asking for user suggestions. Yeah, tell them to make post-fader plugins possible. Please? All of my stuff would work perfectly if you could put in fader plugins post-fader. DAWs seem not to be willing to do that. So Tony's asking, can I manage some guitar conditioner is an EQ? And the whole point of guitar conditioner is the simplicity of the operation. So dry wet isn't going to work for it, but there can be other guitar things in future more along the lines of that. That's going to be like when I start digging into the amp thing, and that's going to be kind of painful. Although I will say this, I do have a preamplifier that I have used things like, I've done some of my music jams with the arch top there, not really an arch top, like an Ibanez hack on a Gibson ES 175. It's basically the Steve Howe style and or Ted Nugent style. I prefer Steve Howe as far as that goes. With a single P90 pickup stuck in the neck. It's my jazz thing, and when I'm using that, I run it directly into the board. That's what I would be needing to do if I was going to be working on... Oh, and have my... No, okay, guess not. I saw myself on the screen and I was like, I'm turned away and seem to be frozen. Maybe everything's broken, but no, everything wasn't broken. That's what I would need to do if I was working on guitars, is start fooling with running any number of possible guitars into the box using that DI and just capturing it directly and going like, okay, now that I've done this, now what do I do? And it wouldn't give me an analog option because I'm doing that with the actual amp. And I wouldn't be able to get guitar things in the box that were anything like what I'm doing with amps and effects pedals, but I would need to use that path of basically plugging into the computer and then fending for myself. I would need to get into doing that in order to start bringing stuff out like, you know, a guitar conditioner with more in the way of controls and things to do, and guitar amp models and stuff like that, which is a failing business and a losing game. I don't think there's much to be gained from that, but I'd need to be doing that. I do have the facility to do it. I could plug into the preamplifier. I have a high impedance input, and that would be something that I could start doing. I just haven't done it yet, and the week that I do it probably would be another week where I have no music jams and my usual stuff just goes out the window because I'm doing something so different. I don't know what to tell you. I'm sure it'll happen at some point. Is there a top 3 plugins for yours that you recommend for mastering? No. Clear no. I would not recommend a top 3 plugins for mastering. And I'll tell you why. It is because mastering is not putting a coat of paint on stuff. Mastering is listening to the audio. Oh wait, no, I can do a single plugin that I recommend for mastering. It doesn't change the sound significantly as far as recording through it. Monitoring. If you're just trying to figure out what you're doing with mastering, rather than thinking about anything that this is the tone that I get, this is the EQ that I use, any of those things, get monitoring. Start checking out some of those test sounds like peaks, subs only, slew only, rather than thinking about what plugin should I use to make the highs silky or any of that stuff. Like, that is a false trail. Mastering is about figuring out what's actually happening in the sound and doing relevant things. You could run monitoring and check out stuff like, you know, here is what my super low bass is doing, here is what my general loudness is doing, so on and so forth. You know, peaks will show you some of that. And you could be doing that and then just run only the Logic channel EQ and still be doing relevant things as far as mastering, even if the Logic channel EQ sounds like garbage compared to some of the stuff that I've got. And that is because mastering is not about giving the Chris Johnson Airwindows plugin sounds. Mastering is about knowing what you are doing. And that is why I bring up monitoring as the only thing that I can consistently recommend in mastering, because monitoring is the one where you can like flip a switch basically and go, now I am listening to only the highs of this mix. Does anything seem wrong? Now I'm listening to the huge rumbly subs does anything seem wrong? And it will show you stuff like, now that I've turned on all of the subs and the lows are just rumbling and shaking and the kick drum is way too loud and other stuff is getting lost, or I am hearing nothing but bass and the kick drum isn't there. Those are the things. Those are the things. So before Pekka Cookie scrolls off of the screen, in Starter Kit video, you didn't put Purist Console Channel to Reverb AUXes. Why not? That is because the reverbs and the compression bus are in fact inside the console system. You can do that, and me doing this test mix and trying to match what I had in hardware, that's what I chose to do. Especially with reverbs and things, it's totally something that you can do. You're going to want to hit each of the console halves once, but it's not necessarily about, like you noticed, even the compression, even the multiple interstage outside around the compression to emulate transformers, all of that stuff is running inside console. And the reason I can do that is because they were not making significant gain changes. They were still acting basically like unity gain. Interstage always acts basically like unity gain. Pressure with almost no pressure added to it, almost no extra compression, acts a lot like unity gain, and it also has a certain amount of automatic gain compensation built into it. So if you turn it up, it's not just only going to make stuff louder. It also turns itself down on the output to try to balance it. It's trying to be one of those one knob things. So especially when you leave it at 0 and you're not boosting anything at all, these things can run inside console because they're not departing that far from unity gain. It's also the same thing like when I was doing the focus to make it sound like a tube desk. And I brought in mid-range and it distorted the mid-range a little bit, but that also served as an amplifier just for the mid-range, which pushed stuff inside the console system to be slightly hot, slightly too loud, which, since it's running inside console, also makes it be more dynamically expanded, but that's exactly what I was doing on purpose. And these are the things that I mean, like, as a expert console user and the person who invented it, you can more or less trust that I know what I'm doing with that, and that when I'm doing stuff like that, it's on purpose. And yeah, I've often recommended people try stuff without necessarily like decoding every little thing in the assumption that you must apply the thing on the subs outside the console summing system. It's like, no, you can. If you know what you're doing, you can get a lot farther with that stuff. The RMS thing, no, not necessarily. Well, kinda. Basically, RMS is just slowed down peak. RMS is like smeared out peak. So, release time, which is what I was just trying to think of. Release time responding more quickly or slowly depending upon how solid stuff is. It's because that like an opto compressor is going to act a lot more like an RMS thing. But it's not that it's got a special code in there that it's like, this engages the RMS thing. It's just not reacting that fast. Pressure is like that. Pressure reacts very slowly sometimes. And it's totally running on an RMS thing, but all that is just not instantly attacking. It's much more slowly attacking. It does not apply the attack immediately upon getting it and then try to figure out what to do. Instead, it applies a tiny amount of the attack, and you have to keep doing it to bring the level down. Tube versus tape, tube versus transistor, what to use when? Treble versus bass versus mid-range, what to use when. It's kind of the same. Alistair, oh, thank you. Let me keep scrolling, keep up with the... This is good as far as questions are concerned. I'm chattering away like mad. My voice will be shot by the time I'm done. my coffee will be gone by the time I'm done. Something for DAWs. Bo, that's literally what console is. So yeah. But there's no reason you'd have to have it be a standard plugin format in itself. If you could just put stuff post fader, that's all you really need. And you don't even need it if you're willing to deal without faders, but that is sad. People like faders. So, are the out-of-stand plugins rebranded Airwindows plugins? Yes, they're open source. He gets to download any of the code anytime he wants and do stuff with them. Do they get updated? Ask him. But I don't know. It's not actually my problem. So if people are using my code to expand their stuff, it's on them to keep doing. All of the coffee has been drunk. Yay. David, not just another dither is built into monitoring, so that's why I didn't specify it. That is my assumption on also what people should be using. So you're correct in that for mastering, not just another dither, but it's built into monitoring, so it doesn't have to be done as a special separate thing. I have seen people liking the first version of that. This is why I proliferate the numbers of plugins rather than deleting previous plugins and replacing them, is because people are like, oh man, that first version was way better than what you did afterwards. And maybe I don't agree, but they should continue to have access to it. So they're good gain volume automation plugins. Purest gain. You can do the dB, and then also the lower slider is smoothed. So I would call that a good volume automation plugin. You do the lower slider if you want like smooth volume fades and things. Yeah, David is talking good sense, which is why I have not just another dither as built into monitoring. Basekit can indeed be useful for mastering, and Buttercomp can do glue in a sense. In fact, there's a number of things that it does quite well. I probably need to return to that and keep doing new things about it at some point, because that's the thing, is Buttercomp is the one where it's an interleaved compressor plugin that is also double-sided, so it's a class A-B, maybe just class B, where the different gain trims will vary depending upon what side of the wave you're on. So that is it does a distinct thing that other compressors don't necessarily do, perhaps because people think it's a ridiculous thing for compressors to do. But I did it anyway, and some people like it, and that could very well contribute to glue, depending upon how you hear things, you know. Do I use console along with out of the box, or do I not need it when mixing out of the box? If I was doing, and this is something I'm going to be looking into in future, like as I keep developing, like the little rock jam that I did, you'll notice no vocals for a couple of reasons. Firstly, I'm not really a very good singer, in my opinion, but also I chatter along with all of this technical stuff, and people still find fault with it and go, you're all over the map and so on. I have a real problem coming up with like things that I feel are worth being sung in any sense. So I do a lot of instrumental stuff just because I don't have the words for songs. I can't think of stuff. That needs to change. I need to grow out of it. But it's a stop for the time being. The reason I bring that up is because I would absolutely be running vocals through like a single fader or maybe a couple of faders. I would absolutely be going like, oh, here is my vocal track. Even if I was doing out of the box, I'd be like, and let's now double track that. And let's run the double tracks through the single output onto a single knob on my out of the box thing. And if I was doing that, I would need to be doing some kind of I've been needing to do some kind of console-based system, but one dedicated to the purpose. I'm going to be looking into that because there will come a time when I'll really want to do that, and there are a lot of people out there who have much more use for that than me. It can't be just only about what I like to do. It's so obvious to me that almost everything uses vocals, and if you can do singing, you can do double tracking and stuff. David agrees with me that singing sucks in general. Here's the thing. If you must put vocals on something, and you can't sing for crap, and you can't do a single track that's worth anything, and you can't double track and have it be worth anything, do 6. That's the Slade technique, where if you can't sing a single lead vocal, do 6 lead vocals and blur them all together, and then that's going to sound basically like glam rock or something like that. And it's a great trick if you can't sing. I haven't done that much with it, but I've done stuff like there's a track that I did called Discord Welcome Home that I did some neat things with at one point, where it's like a sort of heavy rock track, like these things that I sometimes do. And the vocals are about My Little Pony characters going to the New York Stock Exchange. It's wild, wacky stuff. I've also done pitch changed vocals and been soundly mocked for that kind of stuff. And mostly it's because, I just hate my own voice and hate me doing that. But on Discord Welcome Home, I did a harmony and a heavy rock belting kind of thing. And this is before I made Voice Trick, so I did not have the option to be singing into a microphone and hearing stuff over speakers. Maybe that would help me. Maybe I would be better at it if I did that, because there are people who do. But one thing I did do was double track the lead vocal and double track the harmony vocal. And that got me a sound that was it was working out fairly well. And if I was doing that and bringing it into a mix, I might very well want to bring it up on just one knob or bring it up on 2 knobs. And that would require me to have a console style thing. I really kind of have the sense of there needs to be a console variation built for vocals. There needs to be a console variation that is just designed around being able to get a vocal blend. And I even have a very good reference material that I could use for that. It's not me, and nor can I put a microphone up and have like 8 of me around it singing to get that. So anything I do in the studio is inevitably going to have to be faked. But I have a vocal reference of amazing vocals being captured basically a cappella around or kind of around a microphone. And it is on the Eagles DVD that is the story of the band. I'm not remembering the name of the DVD at the moment, but there was an Eagles DVD that's not a concert so much as it's the documentary of how the band worked. And there's 2 DVDs. One of them is their normal history in the 70s. And then there was a follow-up documentary of like History of the Eagles Part 1 or History of the Eagles Part 1 and 2. And then the follow-up was like their coming back in like the 2000s and so on. Here's the thing. That History of the Eagles DVD starts off with a bang, very impressively, by having the Eagles at the height of their success, like Hotel California era, where Randy Meisner was still their high vocalist before they got Timothy Schmidt in there. Timothy Schmidt, interestingly, was singing on Steely Dan tracks, and I spent a little time yesterday trying to figure out which tracks he was on. But no, I don't think it is Hell Freezes Over. Let me scroll back and see. Yeah, before I leave that behind, Updating tape delay. I can't update tape delay in a way that parameter changes are smoother and more pleasing. I don't have the code for doing that yet. In order to do it, I'd have to have a buffer and be tracking over the buffer. This is not to say it's impossible, but right now I don't have that going on. I don't have an update for tape delay that could let you like shift pitch or whatever and have it act more analog-y. So I can't do that right now. It may happen in the future. There may be a thing that I can do with it, but it is not happening right now. David doesn't understand the smooth slider in purest gain. It is another gain trim. It goes from silence to full volume, which is 1. And it is just another gain trim over the previous gain trim. But it can go to silence, whereas the previous one can't. And it reacts slower to changes, whereas the other one tries to go quickly to whatever new settings there are, because it's resisting zipper noise, and it's also resisting irregularities and fades and things. It really is trying very hard that if you like are just trying to do slow motions, it's going to try harder to smooth out any small irregularities in there. Or if you do quick motions, it's still going to smooth it out a lot. That's why it's called smooth. So separate other gain trim there. And then we scroll the heck back and we'll talk about some of those things. Yeah. Here's the thing, Ben. If you're layering vocals, you would want to use something that mixed like air, because digital does not mix like air. You cannot listen to, this is why I was starting to talk about the Eagles DVD and the way in which, you know, it's Hotel California era Eagles. They do actually have Joe Walsh in there. And the it's not Hell Freezes Over. I think it's History of the Eagles Part 1. Movie starts with them backstage at the height of their powers. The way they start is doing a little vocal warm-up backstage. Somebody had a camera and a microphone and was there to see that. And they're about to go live. They're all standing backstage in a little cluster of people. There's like 4. There's Don Henley, Glenn Frey, Randy Meisner, and Joe Walsh, who's like making faces. He's struggling to keep up. And they are singing a cappella the song Seven Bridges Road. There are the stars in the southern sky, with little finger gestures to conduct each other and stuff. And they're getting ready to go on stage by going like, okay, let's nail this harmony before we go out. We're not going to go out until we have this insanely, gloriously good. And they really, really do it. And it's being recorded by just this backstage camera and just one mic. And the air just lights up. It's sick how good those vocals are, because they're doing their Eagles thing. It's like Randy Meisner is hitting those high notes with great purity, and Don Henley has his sort of husky superstar voice going on thing. There's some vocals are very interesting. I might not be able to do them, but they're very interesting. And you got Glenn Frey. He's doing his like rock. He's singing out. He's projecting quite a lot, and their blend is there. The blend started out with Henley and Randy Meisner up on top, and Glenn Frey using his belting rock and roll projection thing, and God, what is it? Their other guitar player who is better than Joe Walsh at singing, but not as rock and roll at guitar playing. And I know who it is, but they started out with that vocal blend, and when they were trying to get started, and they were trying to work with the producer they were doing, he was not interested in them at all until they sang. And they did a a harmony thing on something, and he went, okay, I'm in. Now I'm doing your albums, and he did their first couple of albums. So in order to do the console variation that, and throwing some compression in them might be a handy thing too, like throw curve in it or something like that. But doing the harmony vocal console variation would be necessary for getting into that kind of thing. And again, I have a reference for how that's supposed to be when it's absolutely wonderful, because I can just put that track on, I can put that documentary on, and I think it's a brilliant choice that the very first thing you hear is Seven Bridges Road being sung a cappella by these guys backstage. It's like no studio trickery, none of that, nothing is fancy. This is just them in an acoustic space, and the air just catches on fire. It's astonishing. And I'd need to be able to do that in plugins. I'd need to be able to get the voices to sum that well to really have that going. And testing it would kind of require me being able to sing like as good as that, which ain't ever happening. But that's the target. It's possible to get the target, and that's always important. Scrolling back, checking out things. Yeah, I don't think you can actually damage yourself using 192K. And if you're getting like problems with it, then my distortion plugin that it just put out does a very good job of dealing with that. So you're talking about oversampling. Yeah, the new distortion, everything about it handles all of the high sample rate stuff very gracefully, because it's using averaging to just smooth that stuff out. So you're never going to be getting intermodulation distortion from like harmonics way up there. It's using the high sample rates to the best and keeping them away from aliasing. By the way, it's nice if you guys are like collaborating with each other. That's usually something I can't even begin to do. You know, as David sadly knows, because he would love for me to be collaborating with that, but I don't really work that way with anybody, like ever. I try to bring people on to things like, I don't know, the Minecraft streams or whatever, and I'm looking into picking up this. I've been working in recent weeks on getting better at Blender, the 3D modeler, because I've got some tools that help me use that better, and I've got friends, including the Minecraft friends, who are interested in picking up that technology. But collaborating in music, basically the only way that works is if like I'm mixing your album or something like that. And I've done that, I just don't do it very often. Patrick is asking, is it bad to record vocals with a calibration mic? Oh, no, not necessarily. It's like, are you getting the sound that you need out of it? You know, and there is no reason you couldn't use a calibration mic. It might be kind of like the little Electret mic for my lavalier. It might be kind of bright and ungraceful. It's not going to sound like a more dedicated vocal mic, but you can get useful things out of it. And if it sounds that nice to you, there's something about that that is working for what you're doing. Go by that. Go by like, oh, this sounds perfect to me, whether or not it seems to make sense in the real world, because you're going towards something that you're getting strong positive reactions out of. And you're going like, oh yeah, this is great. That's a good sense to have. Follow that to wherever you're going. Ben's asking, what's my favorite Airwindows glue compressor? No such thing. As usual, it's all about the context. So many of these questions become this is about the context. I can't answer that right now. And this is one of them. It's like, what's my favorite glue compressor? That's going to depend upon what I'm doing with it. You will note that I'm using pressure in the starter kit. So that's like up there with what I would go to as a default. That's basically why I chose with that. That's not to say that I automatically use even glue compressors at all. It depends. I think some of the smeariness in the analog mix on the starter kit song is because I went with a Heritage Audio successor, and that's like not exactly an 1176. That's a sort of Neve style configuration, and one of the things going on with it, which is why I used all the interstages, is that it has transformer coupled inputs and outputs, and it is it's got this sort of fluidity going on, although it also reacts weirdly to some kinds of settings. I'm not at all sure that it would be my favorite glue compressor in the hardware world. It's just the one that I've got. Oh yeah. Infinity is doing stuff in Blender. Yeah, we're looking into fooling with that a little bit more. Bo, I did give up on Reaper because I couldn't find my way around. I went back to Logic for doing the starter kit because I needed to actually work in it and know what I was doing. Also, I'm more familiar with like bringing up the whole screen and everything, although that is something that I could have done on Reaper, and it would have only shown how confused I was and how I didn't know where anything was. So that's a more sort of large scale thing. Like as far as kinds of programs and things, I've been listening to folks in my process of learning how to pick up this 3D stuff. Because the cool thing about Blender is that since it's free, anything that I do with that or talk about that, other people can jump on. If they find it exciting, then, oh yeah, Don Felder, that's the name I was thinking of. Original Eagles Harmony Blend. But Blender is free, so it's more accessible for people to get into, and that carries a lot of weight for me as far as stuff that I get into and get excited about. It doesn't always stick. Reaper is not free, but it's very affordable. Oh, Infinity, you've asked that more than once. No, I don't think it is. Like the I've been learning about Blender, which is quite a Blender, which is quite a hard topic, even though I've been studying like 3D stuff for many, many years, so I have some familiarity with those things. But I'm also watching a bunch of videos by a set of YouTube guys that go by flipped normals. And flipped normals are working in the commercial industry and find that everything that they're doing is in like Maya and ZBrush. And it's not only because they're just not used to Blender yet or whatever, but there are specific things. Like ZBrush is using a thing called SDIMs where they can divide texture painting into little squares, extra tiles, and have them at different scales and stuff. And Blender doesn't have that going on yet. Blender is adding all of the stuff that the other software relies upon very, very quickly. But these guys are saying, like, is Blender ready for commercial work? No. And then they go, and let's explain why. It's not because it's that terrible. Many things it does are really quite amazing. There are these details, like if you have a 10 million mesh model in ZBrush and you're like saving it or importing it or something like that, then you can do that in 5 seconds. And in Blender, you can do it in 55 seconds. And that is a deal breaker as far as working with 10 million poly models. And is that reasonable? Don't know, but if you're doing a major Hollywood movie, you have to work with the 10 million poly models, and so that matters. And the SDIMs, as far as, or I think I'm remembering what that's called, as far as Blender not yet being ready to do texture mapping in these isolated little squares so that you can load a whole bunch of different texture maps and have them at different resolutions. Key feature for the super professional workflow, and not yet present in Blender. So they're basically saying, like, I need literally 100% of this Hollywood movie making stuff because that's literally what we're doing. Blender is at 95 to 98%. I still need the remaining 2%, therefore it's not even a question. But that's the interesting thing with that kind of stuff, is you make choices like the choice that I made in going back to Logic. It's not only like Reaper was absolutely as capable as Logic in a whole pile of different ways, including just straight up sound quality. I could run it with the 64-bit bus. Logic is a 32-bit bus, and I'm dithering to the 32-bit bus, but I can make the argument that, like, well, Reaper's sound quality is better and the configurability of this and that is better. But I still started out multi-tracking and such on Logic 7. That's a number of years ago, Logic 7. So it is not easy for me to get past the fact that, like, all of my muscle memory is with this one program that has stayed basically the same or at least similar. And so when I need to do a bunch of stuff and, like, lay down a bunch of tracks and get something done in a day, that is the program where, even though I get little bits of it wrong, like I thought the I button was a phase flip, and it's not. I got that wrong. But with the exception of little details like that, I did not have to ask any questions about, like, let me go on Google and figure out how to make this happen. Like, okay, I want to do this basic thing. I've got to route this to this, and then over here, I have no idea how to do that. Like, going back to Logic, I was able to do that quite easily. And yeah, Ben, Core Audio on Mac is in fact limited to 32-bit. So even on Reaper, if you're using audio unit plugins, you're going to be using 32-bit bus. That said, I handled 32-bit bus very well. And with some of this stuff, like the analog mix, I could do that in Logic without using any processing on any of the audio streams. So it didn't make any difference. I was basically capturing 24-bit files and playing them back without any digital processing at all. That's what that analog mix is. Every output is outputting from the DAW through a multi-channel DAC, untouched audio from how it got captured. So essentially the analog mix, I was treating it like it was is radar, where it is just a tape transport. And that is the whole thing about that. So I did go back to Logic because I was comfortable with it, and I see a lot of other people getting heavily into it. And my thing with Reaper is that that's one of the big reasons why I started doing VSTs in the first place. And, look, David, look is not the thing. It's like I could go into the Logic environment and do some really flaky things with MIDI. These are not necessarily things that can be done. And I'd love to talk more about ZBrush. Maybe we can talk about things like ZBrush and Blender on the Minecraft stream, because I'll probably be bringing it up. I'll have been fooling around with it for a couple of days, and my friends will also be fooling around with it to some extent as well. Stephen asks, are you familiar with DAWs that don't support generic plugin interfaces? Yeah, I'm using OBS, and OBS doesn't support any plugin interfaces in any of my stuff. So some of it I can run and some of it I can't. And I have no power over fixing that. If they don't support generic plugin interfaces, I'm stuck. There's nothing I can do. And David is correct that Patchwork by Blue Cat Audio can sometimes be a fix for that. And Mac VSTs or any VSTs can be coded so that they'll run on the 64-bit bus. If you're running the Reaper on Core Audio, it is going to be a 32-bit bus going in and out of the program, period, bottom line. So, and I'll point out that Logic does have a summing. Logic's summing engine can run in 64-bit, and I tell it to do that. But, you know, the plugins for anything that are audio units, components, that's always 32-bit. And a lot of VST stuff can be 32-bit, and VST does have the double replacing thing, so you can run VSTs in 64-bit, but if it's on Core Audio, it's going to go back to 32 anyway. And it may or may not be doing that for lots of stuff. Like if you have a channel and you've got a component in among the VSTs, maybe it'll make that entire channel go to 32-bit. I don't know how they do it. Ahmed is asking, you're not seeing the time banner. I wonder if it's visible. Yes, it is. See, it's under my guitars. It's on the synthesizer now. And it's 137. Like the Patreon dwindled back down again. But it's keeping basically the same amount. We're good. But it means that I'm going to be going for another 5 minutes or maybe a little longer than that. So yeah. You'll see that... You see too much of a delay. There it is. There is the time banner. I cut it down a little bit. So is it possible to measure what dither noise does to a signal and do it with maths without applying noise? No. No. Dither is about applying noise in one way or another. Oh, also an interesting side note, folks who are in SoundCloud, I have bowed to a social media requirement that I never really wanted to do, but now I've done it and it might affect you. If you are on SoundCloud and you are following me on SoundCloud, I have already followed you back. I have rendered my SoundCloud account such that I cannot use it by just going to the page and seeing what's been done most recently, because over the last week or so, I have chosen to literally follow everybody back, which seems to have helped. I think that's one of the ways that people get more followers and stuff. It's like, oh, hey, you responded. Let's have other people come and join. But it means it's useless to me. Now I can only go to other people's profile pages to check in on particular things that I'm following and interested in. And if I go to just like my stream, it's completely useless because I'm following all these random people and who knows what even music they're making, and they're making so much of it that it's just impossible to pick through. So that's fine. But what that means to you is if you were on SoundCloud, you can get a follow from me. You just go and follow me, and unlike before, now I'm following everybody back. It seems to just be the thing to do. Renders the SoundCloud interface useless, but whatever. I am not sure what unfollow spy is, but that's probably something that I wouldn't go as far as to do, because if it's just a mechanical get followers thing, that's less interesting to me. Because what I really like is people who actually am liking what I'm doing and are listening to it. But if they're doing the same thing that I am, of like following absolutely everybody, then nobody is ever going to hear any of it because it's just too busy of a stream. Well, we'll see. We'll see. When I posted the SoundCloud stuff this morning of all of the... I posted all those console variations as a playlist, and then went and doctored. I'm going to go back in there and make sure that you can download everything, because I don't think it can be downloaded yet. It didn't give me those options when I was uploading as a group. So I have to go into every individual one and enable it one by one. But when I was doing that, I immediately got somebody who started posting on the things and being like, oh, hey, follow my thing, go to my profile for viral marketing tips. And I was like, okay, delete. So some of that maybe is not all that great, but I guess if I was walking into it, then that's fine. I will allow a certain amount of people going like, oh, you're clearly trying to do viral marketing, therefore sign up for my free followers and everything. And totally not what I want. But I have decided to follow back everybody who's following me, and that turned out to be an extremely large labor because there were lots more people that I wasn't following. And so now if you are on SoundCloud, you can get another follower off of me. And if you were already following me, then you've already got that, so you're welcome. I'm going to talk about Procol Harum. I don't know shit about Procol Harum. I do know one thing about Whiter Shade of Pale that's kind of amusing, though. And I will say that before we sign off, because we're getting close to the end of the stream. Rather than make more coffee, I'm probably just going to make like a Welsh rarebit, cheese on toast, and try to settle down and maybe set up the synthesizer for tomorrow so I don't have to scramble to do that. Might do a little bit of that. But one of the things about Whiter Shade of Pale is that is not a Hammond B3 organ that you hear on it. What you hear on it is like a Hammond M100. It is a sort of older, cheesier organ that doesn't have the full power of like a B3, although I think it's still a tone wheel organ. And the M100, unlike the B3, had apparently such tiny, flimsy, light keys that you could do these just wipe your hand across it and do all these crazy glissandos, whereas if you were doing that in a B3, you'd like break a finger. You could still do it, but the M100 is that much lighter and easier to smush the keys around that they were able to do some really wild glissando stuff, specifically because that was a particular type of Hammond that's not a B3, doesn't have the clarity, it's a little murkier, it's a little sort of more fuzzy and distant, like the analog blur and smear kind of stuff. More of that than a proper Hammond B3. So the wonderful Hammond organ sound of A Whiter Shade of Pale is not the celebrity key most popular Hammond organ that you can find. It is a different, lesser form of Hammond organ that you might even be able to find them around, and they wouldn't probably cost as much as the full-on, classic choice B3 model. So yeah, I can't talk about the compositions. I'd like to dig into more compositional stuff. That'll be a different kind of programming, probably done in the Godot engine. As soon as I get audio working on that, I have a game to put out, and I also have some experiments to do. So maybe that's something that will be happening. But turns out I had a little something to say about Procol Harum and stuff. It's just not the composing. No idea on new evergreens on the way, certainly nothing this week. And I'll bear in mind and see whether anything else comes to mind. I know I mentioned a possible... also, there's another interesting possibility. I caught somebody that I follow on the internet, one of the Loading Ready Run crew, doing her music stream for the first time, because she normally does it just after I go to bed, and I'm not willing to disrupt my schedule that much, so it doesn't work out very well for me. This time it was 3 a.m. this morning, and I caught the tail end of it. I was like, oh my god, she is online. Brave New Faves is online. Kathleen from Loading Ready Run. And so I attended that, and she was doing classical performances and stuff. The theme of Brave New Faves is no VODs, no masters, which is a riff on the saying no gods, no masters. But it means you are not saving it for later playback. And that apparently is how she gets away with playing music, copyrighted music, over the stream on a regular basis. And that's the theme of her show. It's the Just People Hanging Out category. And she's playing this music, but nobody is capturing any of it. And she's not saving it for later on Twitch. And apparently you can do that. I'm not sure how much you can do that. And that is another possibility as far as taking evergreens and being able to do things. Is if I started doing a Twitch stream, and the Twitch stream was me playing records for people. I don't know. It would depend. And I'm not ready right now to add another day of live streaming to the schedule, but in the absence of doing another Evergreens podcast, I could try to do the Twitch thing, which I'm not currently doing. All this streaming is happening on YouTube. But Twitch is a place apparently where you can do that as long as you promise you're not going to save it. I don't think you're allowed to do it, but it is apparently something that you can do. And Steven, you're welcome about the distortion. So yeah, Drive, this does include a variation on Drive, so yeah. Ahmed's asking, are you going to buy or DIY a Rolly Seaboard? Probably not. I think they're very neat, though. Very interesting. I don't think I'd be able to DIY that. If anything, I have figured out how to start getting into the DIY hardware thing in a novel way. I just haven't gone very far with it yet, but I'm tossing the ideas around, and I'll leave you with that. The whole secret briefcase idea, which was what I was calling solder core, or basically taking a lot of different chips and wiring them together into a DIY homebrew synthesizer, or at least something that does cool stuff. It occurred to me that I could take IC sockets and patch together with them with little tiny jumper cables like Bastel likes to use. And the problem there was like, oh, I can do this and I have the perf board and all that kind of stuff, but then buying the rack rails and making it Eurorack compatible is a big pain, until it occurred to me that if you got like pine boards, like just pine wood strips, furring strips, anything like that, of the right size, and I think they already are pretty much the right size, like drew a line down the center of the pine board on the edge, built that into the secret briefcase or any other kind of structure that you're using as an enclosure, took the perf board, say you're building some kind of power supply into it, and that's another thing that I would have to do. Took the perf board and used thumbtacks to hold the perf board down on the pine wood. You would not have to go and buy rack rails for your rack mounting. You would not have to go and buy screws and things and nuts for attaching them together. You would not have to drill out the perf board to fit the Eurorack screws. If you did it that way, you could choose the correct width so that anything that you did would eventually be able to work in a Eurorack system if you set it up right. But you could cobble it together into a homebrew kind of setup and remove stuff out of your rig by pulling the thumbtacks out and lifting it off. Because the thing about perf board is you can stick a thumbtack through the little tiny holes in the perf board, meaning you could fasten it down to rack rails that happen to be wood, and that would work pretty well, and it would be solidly mounted. But you don't have to have a drill press, you don't have to have anything other than a bunch of thumbtacks and pieces of wood, which are much more easy to work with, and the perf board. And you can take the perf board and divide it into pieces that you can build little circuits on, and you can make the perf board be the correct size by scoring it and snapping it. You don't need the heavy machinery to do that. So I might be on to a project of being able to get like these chips and things and really get into a build your crazy secret briefcase, open this up and it looks like a bomb maker has made a sane thing. And choosing enough of these extraneous things, like the right chips, choosing ways to wire up these little IC sockets where you can plug the pins in and stuff, and have a truly configurable synthesizer where you're wiring up the chips, more or less you're wiring all the chips up instead of making even printed circuit boards. You'd be soldering some of the things like power in there, and you'd be taking stuff like the IC sockets, breaking them off into little sections and using those as the basically output jacks, and wiring everything up in such a way that it's minimal stuff that you need in order to get it working. Like if you have one of the CEM3340 oscillator chips, you can get a pile of those. Those are much cheaper than buying actual modules. And, it's like $3 to $7 or so per chip. And then rather than build a module around it, you put it on the perf board, you run power to it with a wire, and on the back of the perf board, whatever auxiliary circuitry you need in order to make it function. And on the front of the perf board, you got your little IC sockets, and you've wired those up so that you can stick a little jumper cable on and be like, here is the 1 volt per octave input, stick a little jumper cable into that, and we now have the 1 volt per octave powered. Here's several of the different outputs. Okay, we'll label that, maybe use some paint, or I'm looking into getting some electrical tape, really crappy cheap electrical tape from Amazon, which is color-coded, and I'll see whether that's any good. My understanding is the colors are very good, but the adhesive is garbage. So what you do is you get some glue, you cut little pieces out of that, and you color code your synthesizer so you can see where on the chips you're sticking the wires into. And if I can do this, I can get into a zone where I'm doing a like crazy mad scientist build your own synth kind of thing that can have very useful, like I can work out useful stuff. I can make sequencers already from some of these things. I just haven't done it, but it's very simple to do. I can do an octave divider. I have done that. There's a lot of, distortion units. I used to do those for guitar stomp boxes. I can do all of those things very effectively. The question is to what extent do you have to buy potentiometers and jacks and cables and stuff just to start doing? Or can you just buy the chips and start wiring them together and have a context where you can just, get a pile of this, a pile of that, and start making it happen? So that's kind of exciting. And I'm going to see what I can do as far as that. And on that note, I'm going to say good day to you. And full with my screens and stuff as ever. And I will talk to you guys later. Thanks for hanging out with this chat. It ran kind of late, but I started talking about the hardware DIY thing, and I'm delighted that I actually have that going somewhere. And I'll talk to you next week. Tune into the SoundCloud for techno and also an ambient jam. That'll be happening in the next couple of days. And of course, you can come and play Minecraft with me on Wednesday if you want. And, happy plugins. Laters.